challenges and incentives that can be adopted by different stakeholders of the system to improve technological transfer in a socially responsible way. This is a job that started with a project funded by UNITAID, and the result as part of this program has only the comments and remarks of the authors, but not necessarily from UNITAID. The author, the main author of the research is Abogado Adan Gonzalez, with cooperation with my cooperation and Francisca Bustos. She's a research assistant. In this panel, what we will look for is, while letting you know a summary of the main conclusions from the data, have the possibility for experts in this matter, as our distinguished panelists are from academia and civil society, so they can provide their thoughts and ideas, and what are the challenges and incentives that they can gather from the report, and also those that they consider that can be added or somehow have better conclusions and recommendations. Without further ado, I will want to remind you that we have simultaneous interpreting. We remind attendees that we have simultaneous interpreting. You can select on the right side of your screen, where you can have the option, you have the option or Spanish or English. Following, can you see my screen? I would like to acknowledge and thank you, all the attendees, intellectual property and other organizations from Chile that have shown interest of being part of the discussion. Innovarte, as you know, is an organization with the aim of furthering human development with public interest and sustainable innovation. I am sorry, but Louise' microphone is very sketchy. I'll try to correct that and come back to you. The, this should be a reaction on an issue in the current innovation system where with traditional licensing, we are facing many technologies that are being underutilized, that they could solve huge problems that have an impact on the capabilities for sustainable development. Due to the lack of access to these technologies in all the fields, health, environment, and so on. A very relevant idea that is part of the culture of socially responsible licensing is that not all technology transfer has full social impact. An example that shows how technological transfer could not meet this goal is the case of the 90s that Yale University, in a patent on technology for HIV, was not available for countries in Africa because consider some conditions of accessibility were not taken into account that the pharmaceutical companies should have taken in account. So from the arising from that commotion and work of the civil society and academics, they saw something was wrong, was not working. Technological transfer was not working as it should. So there was a self-regulation from universities. Stanford and other universities developed a set of principles that would improve not only for American universities, but also from universities in the Netherlands and in Belgium. They create an important set of principles and models. In spite of this progress, these principles are not being addressed in an integral way, so there's a job to be done from other countries, specifically in Latin America, where that development has not reached yet. We are looking forward with hope for the innovation network from the Chilean universities with Isabel hopefully for 2026, we have principles starting from the foreign principles, but with the local needs. We'll have principles for socially responsible licensing for Chilean universities. Another interesting development is from the European Union that I also included these principles in their directives of valuing knowledge, and they are working in development principles for voluntary application. That's work in progress. From the principles, as we said, they are nuances depending on the country regarding the principles, but there are some common principles from that universities, when they transfer, they must withhold the right to keep on researching that technology already transferred, and also establishing a responsibility for those transfer technology to be effectively developed and not to be technologies being used only for to have them in the marketplace. Technologies to be transferred must be done in such a way for a commitment of transferring to less developed economies as well as developed countries. The principles are, there are many more principles, but we'll focus on this just to give you a, a taste of what the principles of socially responsible licensing are. They look for equitability for development of innovation. We have seen that there is an awareness on the need of improvement. There are principles already used in many universities in developed countries, but these principles are in the early stages on being implemented at a worldwide level. We have developed this report to identify why these principles are not being applied globally and how to improve this. The main challenges that we can find is from people we interviewed that the main challenge is a lack of experience that universities have, and also the private sector, to understand and apply these principles and their license agreements. So we need to strengthen these capacities and drafting models and other resources and tools that can be used. Another important point for universities is a lot of metrics that allow monitoring of what is the actual social impact of this technology transfer. There are also legal gaps within laws or regulations from the universities that make the implementation of these principles to be very low. Regarding what should be done. They also mentioned another issue, that these principles are voluntary. So This hinders the possibility of implementation. Other issue is internal misalignment within the different departments in the universities. Some are concerned about other considerations, not necessarily the social. So this means there are not standard policies within universities. Another issue is the financial gap in many projects that have a relevance on providing social value, and there's availability from the owners of those technologies to have a socially responsible licensing, but there's not enough funding for the projects to move to other stages until reaching the market. This creates frustration because these projects are left behind. So we need to develop funding mechanisms so they can reach the market at the end. From the industry, the challenges to be solved have to do with mainly there are business models based on exclusive rights. This hinders the possibility of open licensing. There are considerations that can be included in the agreements as not to impact that exclusivity. Another issue mentioned is the concern of managers and pressure from shareholders if they are open for different values that can impact profitability. There are some problems of interpreting of these licensing. Some might interpret them as waivers. There's a lack of strategic communication to highlight the economic and reputational value of voluntary licensing required. Another issue is the possibility of smuggling through parallel imports. Another point from people we interviewed is there is a concern, uncertainty for the demand of technology. Countries with lower and mid income, they don't have to incentives to have access to programs. Another issue that some companies might perceive is that these multilateral agreements with many manufacturers can create a risk on quality of the products to be developed. What are the incentives? In summary, those identified, the more relevant from the financial side is conditional public financing. Governments, when providing grants or subsidies, they support innovation, they establish conditioning regarding adopting the principles of socially responsible licensing. Within tax benefits, they mention tax credits for institutions with research and development a preference in public procurements, government agencies that prioritize suppliers with responsible licensing. From the financial side, creating impact bonuses from private capital available for those institutions or projects with have considerations of social responsibility in the project. From the regulatory point of view, there are many possibilities, alternatives of providing fast track reviews, expedited patent processing for green technologies that now have a fast track. Also apply this fast track for technologies that have provisions of socially responsible licensing. Establishing standardized templates, regulatory flexibility, and contract frameworks standardized. A simplified approval process also for socially responsible innovations, international recognition through mutual recognition agreement for technologies that have been socially responsibly licensed. And another is the availability from government and social sector, the availability of compulsory licensing. Summarizing because I have limited time. Other are intangibles having to do with reputational benefits, create public awards for universities taking part, an innovation ranking, and also other incentives that are social and media pressure. Strategies we have market diversification. You can incentivize to take part as long as we have market segments through affordable licenses to broaden the possibility of businesses that otherwise would not be available to them. Also, licensing that permits cooperation of different stakeholders, including global actors, academic networks that can be strengthened with this cooperation from this type of licensing. To wrap up the key recommendations that we have at the level of national governments, we need to establish legal incentives. The law of technological transfer in Chile, that the ministries have to create incentives such a way that the state can include the need of creating incentives. Also, having public funding conditioned to accessibility to guarantee those who benefit comply with the standards, also strengthening institutional capabilities and inform to the agencies that have to do with innovation on the sense of how licensing is working so they can apply the public policies taking into account this aspect and promoting a regional cooperation with universities and other institutions working in this matter. And a point that has to do with cooperation is creating points of that allow joint purchasing of licensing. For the WHO, it's they need to lead the standardization and legitimization of voluntary licensing because they address the needs of all these sectors for sustainable development. That's why we also added the Food and Agriculture Organization, create metrics, indicators, and recognition mechanisms for institutions doing this kind of licensing, strengthen multilateral platforms, patent pools that are relevant to create links and competencies for transfers and create an international consortium for technology purchase at an international level for key technologies in health and food. We also recommend their being available to provide technical assistance. For WIPO, they have a big role to have for voluntary voluntary socially responsible licensing. They need to create an agenda to create knowledge, also to create a ranking and recognition for these institutions at a world level with the current rankings they have. For public funders, private sector, philanthropic organizations, it's urgent they standardize provisions of access and licenses and financing mechanisms, coordinate common standards among funders, introduce reputational incentives and performance metrics, create bridge funding for startups, and capacity building and development countries through cooperation between universities and research centers. When strengthening capabilities and available of transfer mechanisms, the role of the medicine patent pool is relevant as a model to be replicated for other kind of technologies. I would like now to wrap up my presentation and thank you for your attention. Now we will move on to the section that, without doubt, will be the more enriching from the ideas of the great panel members we have with us. For me, it's an honor having here Isabel Araos. She is the coordinator of the network of state universities. She, they are leading in Chile, the work with universities. So, Isabel, thank you very much for being with us and welcome. We also have the colleague Julia Barnes-Weise. She's Executive Director of Global Healthcare Innovation Alliance Accelerator, GHIAA. I will not go through all your CVs. That will take too long. The next, for those you can see in the screen, are Ella Weggen. She is a senior expert in global health from Wemos. She's the coordinator of the project. that's part of Innovarte, from her organization, that is Wemos, based in the Netherlands. Also famous, not need a doesn't need a presentation. James Love, I cannot see him on screen, but I know he is here. James Love is a director of Knowledge Economy International, NGO. He's a world-class reference in innovation ideas in the field of intellectual property. I would like to start giving the floor to Julia, sorry. The ideas, we'll have 10 minutes of presentation, and then we'll have a second round of 5 minutes for each, in which we will deepen with what are the challenges or the incentives and recommendations that you consider that are relevant. Julia, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Luis, and congratulations to you and the whole Innovarte team for publishing this report, which I know has taken a long time and a lot of effort. So it's been great to read it, and really, I think it will make a lot of food for thought for all the organizations mentioned, and hopefully for some of those who are actually involved in the tech transfer and other agreements to achieve socially responsible licensing. So since I'm going first, I'm just going to give you a fairly simple overview because I know that a number of you are from tech transfer offices. And I think one of the hardest things when you're trying to get someone or a group to do something new is to explain why and what you're asking them to do and what that actually will achieve. So just as an overview, I will say at GHIAA, we talk about principles to provisions. So first we're talking about socially responsible licensing principles and how are those actually implemented. For instance, if you're a tech transfer office or you're another organization that has innovations and you would like to make sure that any of the products that come out reach all of the populations that need those products. If you're a patent lawyer, you probably call it fully exploiting the IP. If you are interested in equitable access, especially the equitable access to medicines group, you are saying that you want that product to be available in the basic principles, which we can talk about later, of equitable access, so that it actually reaches those who perhaps otherwise would not receive it, or in a timely way, or in a way that they can actually use it in their populations. So I think the important thing here is what should you do and why? And maybe it's because I have a legal background, but for me, it is a chain of agreements. It is a chain of events. And perhaps we can talk about this as the formation of an access plan. But welcome especially to those tech transfer offices, because you are the foundation for how innovations actually get to their developers, their commercializers, and what the principles and what the requirements are from those organizations. And so when you do that first license agreement, and I think this report is mainly focusing on license agreements, but also talks about funding agreements and the other agreements that are involved in this chain to achieve socially responsible licensing and equitable access. And so what you put in your agreements and your requirements and how you monitor those going forward is really essential to the achievement of equitable access as you go down the road. So in those first agreements, if you are requiring a licensee to consider what kinds of provisions would most likely move that potential product, let's call it, forward, then it's going to start with rather general provisions, trying to achieve what you want to achieve at the end of the day. And you may not know that at the beginning, but you need to be able to ask a licensee for certain things. And you have to agree that at least one of the goals of access is access to all the populations. So in order to do that, I think I'll explain briefly what I mean to you by an access plan. So traditionally, when we license products out, if you're an innovator, you work for a company, you work for a university, and you license products out, you are probably trying to get the best commercial value from that innovation. And that is something that remains a goal because you can't have an innovation achieve access unless something is supporting the development. So that gets to Luis's mention of innovations, which I think somebody else will talk about a little bit more. And the company or the organization that licenses in that innovation has to do two things already. They have to develop the product or enter into other partnerships to develop the product. And if it's successful in its development, they have to commercialize the product. So in between that is an access plan. And really it is recognizing what barriers and what requirements that potential product is going to face and how, at the end of the day, that is going to reach the patient populations. You don't know all of that at the beginning, but as the product is developed, those things should become clear. And the plan should follow the product and also evolve as you know more about the product. So what does that mean for that original license? It pretty much means that you need to say, here's the goal. We want it to reach all the populations that need it. We recognize that might not be your organization, that might be a sub-licensee or another licensee down the road. And you may enter in agreements with funders. And those funders may have conditions about how that product reaches the end goal. So that start, you putting in the intention and the basic provisions in that agreement is going to move that product forward and likely provide you with a licensee that is interested in doing so or interested in finding another potential developer commercializer. Say medicines patent pool, as Luis mentioned at the end of the road, as one potential conduit to populations that may not have the highest commercial returns. So I wanted to just try to put this in context. So why should a university be interested in this? And Luis has talked about why they should from from a recognition point of view. It also is expanding the market channels in a more traditional sort of pharma speak so that a product reaches more users, patients than it would otherwise. And funders are going to put conditions on, in almost all cases, about what you need to do in order to obtain their funding that moves into more equitable access provisions. And on our GHIAA Map Guide website, we have open access resources, and I can put a link in after I finish so that you can reach some of these. Luis and Adan have mentioned in their paper the CEPI Valneva chikungunya example of access commitments in CEPI's funding agreements with Valneva that then passed forward those commitments in Valneva's license to sell. So part of this is making sure that chain happens. When you license it out, when a funder puts conditions on there, and then the awardee takes that forward into commercial use, the provisions need to move forward. They need to be more directed towards the characteristics of a product at that point in time. And I know I'm probably running out of time, so let me just say, and in order to do these things, especially in a way that doesn't waste time or money along the way, you need transparency to be able to measure things, to have these metrics. And what that means is any of these provisions, and I understand many of the reasons why full agreements often cannot be shared, but you need transparency around the access requirements that are aimed at socially responsible licensing and equitable access so that you can see what you're building on. So if you're a funder, you know what the licensor has asked for. If you are a company that is going to need to license that to a commercial party or to a manufacturer, those conditions need to follow the product and be transparent about those conditions. So when follow-on funders, as Luis mentioned, Unitate is often a very late funder. So those funders need to know what they're building on so that the product has a full access plan agreed by all of the members along, all of the owners and developers along the way. So I think I'll stop there and just again thank everybody that has shown up because it's a really important topic and the understanding about how you do this and why you should do this is really important to give, I think, the urge for everybody involved in this whole chain to see what their part is and to try to play it. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for this very interesting presentation, calling to understand, the need of a long vision with regard how you design your contracts and link with the end result of the technology. So, and thank you because you were very well behaved. You spoke 9 minutes. So you have 1 more minute for the next round. So now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Ella Weggen from Wemos. And Ella, you have the floor. 10 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, Luis, and thank you very much, Innovarte, for this excellent report. It has been a pleasure reading it and also seeing the excellent work that you are doing in Latin American countries. And I think we, as Wemos, we work, of course, closely together with you, Innovarte, in the consortium Medical Innovations for All, funded by Unitate. We are together with Health Action International, Knowledge Ecology International, Medicines Law and Policy, Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, and Afiana Haki. And many of us do some sort of work on voluntary licensing, social responsible licensing. So I think this report is an excellent contribution and a great overview of good practices. What are the challenges? How can we incentivize better? And what and how we can learn from each other, how different actors are perceiving this sector. So I really want to congratulate you on this report. Let me first introduce, beside of coordinating this excellent group of organizations, I also do a little bit of lobby in the Netherlands, and I have been following the developments of social responsible licensing in the Netherlands for quite a number of years. And I think it might be interesting to hear a little bit about that background. I am in close contact with several universities here, and I see also that there is interest from different universities here in the Netherlands as well and on EU level. A couple of years ago, we also saw, I think it was in 2012 or 2014, that we saw for the first time in the Netherlands as well that we were facing the fact that if we would reimburse medicine that we would normally reimburse automatically, if we would do that again, that will deplete a large part of our health budget. So our government back in the days had to come up with some measures to drive back the rising prices of new medicines. And one of these measures was looking into the possibility of conditioning public funding.
Ella, sorry,
yeah.
Ella, please. We have a translator that is under stress, so he begs you to go slow.
Slow. Okay, that's a good challenge. I will try to do so. Yes.
You are doing perfect. Just slow.
Slow. Okay. Yeah, you only give me 10 minutes, so
no. You have 15 minutes. Just 10 minutes one, then we hear everyone, and then we have more 5
No.
minutes, and there will be questions. So
all good. Yes.
So enjoy the ride. We are
Yes.
happy listening to you.
Thanks, Luis. I will talk more slowly. I know it's hard to translate simultaneously. The Dutch government gave a task to the medical universities in the Netherlands to look into social responsible licensing, with the idea that it could also affect, the pricing, the high prices of medicines, because we invest via our universities in the development of medicines. And there is, of course, a big part where I think there should be a priority on the transparency of the public funding of R&D, because if we know more about that, then we can look into conditioning and holding, try to make the best out of this public investment, and which also benefits society. And there's not a lot of transparency about it. So that is one way. You asked me before, what are the two major challenges? So I think transparency on public R&D, of public funding of R&D, is really necessary, and that there's a link between government funding and how to condition this to increase social value. We also learned, as being in the sounding board of a working group looking into how the government how medical universities can improve this policy, that medical universities are also more and more dependent on private sector funding. So hard conditions on pricing is a no-go for universities as well as pharmaceutical companies. But what we learned over the years, I think, so that felt a bit like still we were hoping to get more out of this. But what we do, so we understand it's hard to condition universities with specific pricing policies. But what we do think is feasible to look into access plans globally. So universities, when they negotiate with pharmaceutical companies about licensing or selling their products to the companies, that they ask the companies, can you make an access plan for access to the products that will be developed for low and middle income countries as well? And that's why we are promoting also the Affordable Access Plan developed by the Medicines Patent Pool. These are concrete contract clauses that can be used. And we see there's a lot of interest in this here in the Netherlands. Several universities have already adopted this policy or are conducting a pilot project. And what worked for us as Wemos, because we are quite an unknown NGO, so what we do is we talk to professors, the people that are working, for example, on the development of malaria vaccines, or from the universities that feel the need also for the global health context. And we talk to them and with the TTO offices, because sometimes they have a different priority. So it really helped if we combined the people from inside the universities with the TTO offices, and there we saw a lot of interest. So you asked me another questions. I think a challenge is often, which you mentioned in the report as well, Louis, is a lack of knowledge. So there is more knowledge needed for universities to be able to develop this, and even for companies to be able what to negotiate and how to negotiate. So I think there's also a role for us as civil society to play, and that we do more of these types of conferences and invite people to interact on this, to also overcome the fear of, am I missing out on something if I will, adhere to these types of social responsible licensing? And the fact that the instrument is voluntary, of course. So it depends on the companies and on the universities if they really want to, how strong they want to hold on to this. So I think there's still ways to overcome this. I think the pooling that you mentioned, of course, is a very important remedy, and you can promote local initiatives, national initiatives like this one in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the toolkit that the Dutch medical universities have developed could set an example towards other universities in the EU, and we like this an exchange with other universities in Latin America and America. And another question that you asked is the two main actions that should be taken by WHO, WIPO, and the international funders. I think they can lead the way in the standardization of in the legitimization of voluntary licensing and social responsible licensing. It's an important role for global actors such as WHO, WIPO, and international funders to really make sure that the funding that they give is best spent possible. And by making use of the tools that are already there, Julia just explained about her database. I think it's an excellent tool for funders, for people to look into and take the best practices and learn from each other. Technical assistance can be provided. We as Wemos learn a lot from the medicines patent pool in our exchanges with universities. We always have these technical experts there that can explain more in detail, because of course I also don't always know the technical details of the agreements that are in there. So it's important to have this to overcome the fear and the lack of knowledge. I had one more last shout out. I think it's interesting to know that the Dutch government is also looking in. We just read the new coalition agreement of the Dutch government, and they want to create a uniformity of TTO offices in the Netherlands. And we really hope that we can talk to government officials here to make sure that SRL principles will be in there as well. So this is also something that we will be looking into in the future.
Thank
And
you.
with that, leave it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. Good. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ella, for this presentation that tells us how these principles have been developed, the awareness on implementing them on Dutch universities. This is a matter that goes further along from health and has to be incorporated. These pools of government working are positive, so we will see what happens with those principles that the European Commission is developing. I'm sure you will be taking part in that. Thank you. We will have a second round with another opportunity so you can share what you didn't have the time to do. We have as a third presenter, Mr. James Love. He's Director of Knowledge Economy International. He has worked for WHO, drafting reports and recommendations on how to incentivize voluntary, socially responsible licensing, such as HTAP with WHO, other large projects that he is working on. James.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure always to work with Luis and Innovarte. And we really appreciate the work that they've been doing on this issue of incentives. As many of you know, we proposed in our group initially the idea of the medicines patent pool, and back in 2002, and it took about a decade before that came into being. It really ended up being different than what we really anticipated. It was a much bigger reliance on completely voluntary measures than what we thought would be feasible, and we were pleasantly surprised at how well companies and license holders in the private sector responded in the terms of expanding access to HIV drugs, really led by Gilead. That said, I think that the medicines patent pool has now had a lot of problems expanding the licensing program outside of HIV. and infectious diseases and into non-communicable diseases. And the HTAP, which was our CTAP, which was created, I was also involved in that. And during COVID was really disappointing in terms of how well that played out. So this idea, the idea of focusing on incentives has become more and more important for people, because just depending on some kind of corporate responsibility by people, even at the university level, has really not been it's not been as effective as people would have hoped. Now, the WHO, they published a report on incentives to do voluntary licensing in 2003. And this was looking really initially at CTAP, the program that was set up for voluntary licensing of technologies, both know-how and patents relating to the COVID-19 crisis. Since then, the WHO has transformed CTAP into HTAP, which is supposed to be a more of a broader scope of technologies and diseases than those only affecting COVID-19. And I was asked initially by Michael Ward, who was in charge of the program for a while at WHO, and he no longer is, to look at what additionally could be done in incentives. And I thought that the 2003 report was really an excellent report, and it had many of the things that have also been addressed in the excellent Novartis report. But there were two recommendations in the 2003 incentives report by the WHO that I thought were very, very important. One is that they looked at a lot of individual incentives, and they questioned whether or not they had the adequate scale to have the significant impact on licensing decisions. And second, they thought that you might have to look in some cases at models of licensing that was more reciprocal in terms of the benefits. And in this respect, they were really looking at government-funded research and the conditions that governments would put on licensing. In the work that we did with WHO, I really focused on things that would respond to these two issues. How do you scale the impact of the incentives so they have a bigger impact on licensing decisions for people that hold IP? And second, what possible models are there that look more of a reciprocal nature of the licensing? So you're appealing more to the self-interest of the people that are involved in the pooling exercises. And so the first thing that we looked at was were patent fees. Now, a number of countries have concessions on patent fees primarily related to the size of a company. And sometimes they have different fees for universities than they have for commercial companies. And the WIPO has a special discounts for developing countries. But the problem is that there are lots of fees involved in patenting. The WIPO fees are important, but they're really a small portion of the overall cost of applying for patents and registering patents and maintaining patents. Because they have to be initially, you can go through the PCT, but then you have to go through the national phase, and that can be quite expensive. And even though there's a handful of programs out there at the national level, they don't really collectively not well coordinated. So we were interested in could you have a social purpose discount for licensing patents that has some social purpose involved. And one of the challenges is it's very difficult to come up with a particular criteria. There is one social program that's pretty widely implemented, reasonably widely implemented, and that's the license of right discount, which is typically a 50% discount on patent fees that applies to people that have non-exclusive licensing of patents. And that's why they call it a license of right, that you guarantee that anyone that wants to can license your license on reasonable terms, and if you can't come to an agreement, then a third party, usually appointed by the patent office, will actually set the terms. Germany uses this. UK uses this. There's several countries in Europe. Singapore has a program like this. It's not It's not universal. There's kind of a limited version of this, even in the the new European Patent Convention. But these are one of the problems with this is that it's a binary thing. You're either exclusive or non-exclusive. And there are cases for social purpose licensing where you may want to do something less than exclusive, but still has some social benefit or some social requirement. Like people have mentioned, for example, access plans. Julia mentioned that the NIH, and I work with other people working with Senator Sanders. I know that Public Citizen, MSF, and DNDi were also involved in these talks with the NIH about this for the program of attaching access plans. Access plans are not open licensing. They could involve open licensing, but they could involve other concessions on pricing and access. And so we were looking for a more granular approach. And the proposal we came up with on the patent fees was that there would be a voucher for patent fees that would be honored by there'd be a protocol within the WIPO PCT, and the protocol would be on social purpose licensing discounts. And that would be a voluntary opt-in protocol. So not every member of the PCT would have to participate in this, but if they did, they would jointly, collectively agree that they would all honor a discount on patent fees that would be described as a social purpose discount voucher. Would be the mechanism. And that way, if one country offered the discount, they would know that other countries were doing the same thing, and collectively it would have a bigger impact. Now, how would you get the voucher? That was the other thing we looked at. And we decided that there would that groups, third parties, not WIPO, but third parties like the WHO, like the Medicines Patent Pool, like other similar entities, could approach the members of the opt-in protocol, and they could propose that they be allocated vouchers. And if they had the vouchers, they could use the vouchers as incentives to obtain voluntary licensing. So, for example, if the Medicines Patent Pool had 10 vouchers, or if they had 100 vouchers, or whatever the number was, they could sort of hold these vouchers out as some sweetener to get people to do a voluntary license. They would be able to say, if you offer us a license, we will give you a voucher, and then you will pay less money to register your patents and to maintain your patents in the X number of countries that have joined this protocol. Now, I've got a minute and a half left, so I will briefly mention we had two other very specific proposals that we looked at, one involving government-funded research, which was more of a reciprocal system based on research consortiums that we looked at outside of the medicines area, which were very good matches. And thirdly, we looked at a technology buyout thing that would be basically organized by people buying technology. That's all my time, and thank you very much for inviting me, Louise.
Thank you very much for your presentation. As always, you are looking for solutions out of the box that deserve a lot of attention, and they hopefully will have some traction in the future. Now, thank you, James. Now I have the pleasure of giving the floor to Isabel Araos. She is a coordinator and co-organizer of this event. I am very thankful to her, so she can share some of her outlook from the perspective of Chilean universities. Isabel, you have the floor. First of all, I wish to thank the invitation of taking part. We are in the middle of a recess, so our working teams are not being with us in the southern hemisphere. We are in the middle of a summer, so that for us means holidays. So I'm here in representation of the Innovation Network of Chilean universities. This is made of 28 state universities, public universities, aligned with the principles looking forward the common good. Innovarte has invited us to assess, to have an first view of this matter. A short time ago, we made a diagnosis with 18 universities how they are behaving. State universities regarding socially responsible licensing. Main challenges we can see from this approach, but the more relevant is that they are heterogeneous regarding implementation, regarding regulations, specific provisions on agreements. This gives a big opportunity regarding the potential of some coordination with common factors and these principles. Universities, due to legal mandate, they need to do socially responsible licensing, but their behavior is not very homogeneous within the universities areas. The effort we're doing within Innovarte is to create a common framework of principles and values so they go along with the national laws, but also with the experience you have developed in Europe, and also the potential and opportunities of a North American model, not only in the field of health, hopefully more across the board with other disciplines, but this diagnosis showed us other areas of research of development inside universities that also has a larger challenge for moving forward with a common language from the innovation network regarding this kind of licensing. Has to do a lot with nowadays what universities are developing their accreditation processes, but also it is important the possibility for us to regarding training, the high turnaround in our working teams, especially in the offices of tech transfer that we can see from universities tells us of the need of doing that internally and incorporating in a better way all these factors within universities and have a more permanent way of valuing the outreach of this effort. We, as representing of state universities in Chile, it makes a lot of sense, the experiences you have been sharing with us, not only in the health field, but also we can move this behavior in other fields, hand in hand with the experiences that you have been developing. Give us information to see how inside the university in Chile we are doing with some indicators. Another very important factor has to do with the organization and the organizational culture of institutions. We have lots of regulations. State universities have a very bureaucratic model in Chile. So that is a barrier for immediate incorporations of some regulations. We need cooperation so that can allow us to have a path to have matters that were very significant and can be a collaboration for the common good. Luis, at this time, I cannot go further, so we have been scouting as in state universities, but this space opens the possibility of including these experiences and transmitting them outwards for their development. Thank you very much, Isabel. The work that you are doing and the interest that state universities in Chile have is a fantastic model to be shared with other universities in the region. We greet universities from Costa Rica, Peru, Ecuador that have joined us, just to mention a few. And it's also time to do a regional work that allows us to learn from the realities of each one. And a very important point is that Chilean universities, if they have not formalized the principles, they have a mandate, and their legal mission linked to the social impact. Intuitively, universities are implementing principles of socially responsible licensing. There's not an institutional way of doing this. So there's a message that universities are already understanding that ethics is part of what has to be tech transfer. We are not doing this in vain. This is a space where this is very relevant. Thank you, Isabel. Now, as promised, I will give 2 minutes to each one of you in the same order. So if you want to add something, what are the recommendations? We have some recommendations from the point of view of government needs, but there might be other things that we have left behind. So sorry, Luis' microphone is not working. If you did not mention some things, now is the time. We can prioritize recommendations to work jointly to make them a reality. If you want to add another thing, yes.
Julia, you have your extra
I think
3 minutes.
I will add 3 related things. One is, I think this is a very timely report, and this discussion of how countries can work together and other different cross-national organizations can work together is so important. Jamie mentioned that the NIH licensing group, the intramural, so the licensing group that licenses out the U.S. government innovations, now requires as policy access provisions and an access plan from their licensees from the moment that the license has been granted. And certainly it's not a perfect policy or implementation, but it is a big step forward with a government taking more control over the development and expectations from licensing their innovations. And of course, with the recently adopted, but not yet, of course, ratified pandemic agreement, there's a provision 9.5, which commits countries to develop policies on attaching public interest conditions to research and development funding. So as and when that is ratified and adopted by each country into their laws, they will need to be looking at how are they going to do that? What is the pull through there so that they can say they do now attach these access provisions to their funding. So I think it is a moment where every country and those who are involved in developing policies and ways of moving forward to increase access can move together to really create a lot of both leverage and common understanding of what that's going to look like, and therefore achieving sort of a greater access to a greater number of products moving forward. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Muchas gracias, Julia. Ella, you have your additional 2 minutes, if you have.
Yes, thanks, Luis. I was also thinking about the fact that there's a lot of policy discussions ongoing about regional production these days. There have been several local production forums taking place globally and governments. For example, the EU is investing a lot in regional manufacturing, and I think this is super relevant and super important. And it also reminds me of the fact that I think the need for that to really make it work is, of course, also looking into the technology transfer and the use of voluntary licensing. But if it's not voluntary, then perhaps government should consider non-voluntary measures as well. And therefore, I also think, these days after the COVID pandemic, we learned, and after the withdrawal of USAID, we learned that it's important that regions can produce themselves and have the knowledge and the IP present. So I think that this is my final thought: the importance of social responsible licensing and voluntary licensing to invest in regional production is really there, and I hope that those discussions will continue as well.
Thank you very much, Ella. Muchas gracias, Ella. James, you have the floor for your 3 minutes extra.
Thank you very much. One of the projects we worked on, one of the recommendations we've made is that governments that fund research create a pooling mechanism to share the government's own rights that they have in government-funded interventions with other countries. But one of the challenges here is that countries have different levels of funding levels, and so you have some countries that fund quite a bit in the health area, and some countries that don't really fund very much or nothing at all. And then you have countries with different incomes. You have high-income countries, you have low-income countries. And so the proposal we had for a reciprocal sharing or a pooling of the rights would have 3 categories of funders. One would be countries that were contributing an adequate amount of their own GDP into health-related research, and be like the class A. And then the second class would be countries that didn't fund a lot of R&D, but could make commitments in terms of things that would be appealing to the companies that were commercializing products. And those would include commitments on things like registration, tariffs, procurement, things that were mentioned in some of the other reports that were done both by the WHO and by Innovarte and other people in terms of incentives. So they would provide things that were attractive for people that were product developers. And so that was trying to provide a pathway so a country that didn't spend much money on R&D, like a developing country, could somehow do things that would make it eligible to join the pool and get the benefits of the reciprocal licensing. And the licenses would be shared on a geographic field of use. So they wouldn't be global licenses. They would not be global public good licenses, but they would be within the pool. And the third category would be high-income countries that could buy their way into the pool. They weren't funding a lot of biomedical research, but they could pay a certain amount of money to sort of legitimize their participation in the pool. I mention that because the practical details of getting people to do things that's in their own self-interest is really important, because we are not thinking entirely about what people do because they're good people or because you're appealing to the angels of their character. We're trying to appeal to people that are fundamentally selfish and trying to find out which ways you can get people in that category to do things that they find is in their self-interest, but better than what they're doing now. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So, very good point. How to get selfish people in, and we are all selfish. So it should be difficult to find people interesting. Flavia, perdón. Hola, que me apareció Flavia de Red de Innovación en la pantalla. Isabel, tienes la palabra.
Isabel, you have the floor. Online, when it's been discussed, there is a very important point regarding the Chilean experience. Since April 2024, we have been moving on a project that could open a space at higher education. Since 2024 in Chile, we have been developing a legislation reform, a bill of law for tech development and knowledge with an impact on higher education and industry. This should be relevant on promoting socially responsible licensing. This will provide a more equitable access, has to do with research at the academic level. Therefore, there is a possibility of starting to coordinate more with greater strength agreements with socially responsible licensing with focused provisions for these rights in different areas, can be health or others, but also regarding research and safeguarding their rights. This bill of law is in the second stage in the Senate, could also move forward to promoting this framework that is rather ethical and coordinating with the industry and private sector and universities. However, there is uncertainty because of the new policies and the stress of governments. We're in a process of transition from a different ideological way from the new government from March 11th in Chile. So we hope that this law can have a larger impact on financing and incentives regarding these matters that have to be more dynamic and a dialogue at the national level, especially with the private sector. This has been difficult for state universities to move forward with other experiences giving funding. And the difference between private and public sector, different values from the public sphere. So the law could make a contribution to this space. We are waiting for this process to be solved, hopefully in the first part of this year. This is an uncertain scenario, and we hope that public policies allow us to move forward, configuring or safeguarding these lines that has to do with socially responsible licensing for Chile and for the public university system. Thank you very much, Isabel. A question: if regional universities in this process, Chilean universities, they can take part, of course. The idea is to create this work with all kind of universities. At this time, we're working with but shortly we will work with G9 and other universities. But regardless, all are inviting to this network of universities with socially responsible licensing. We are creating at the Latin American level. We are inviting them to the seminar, and others we will contact along the way. But we need an international discussion. Now we have 15 minutes for questions.
Okay. Okay. So there is a risk of overselling the role and impact of voluntary licenses, and especially with governments that want a solution that they think has no real pain, the risk is even higher. And I urge us, even as we continue to explore ways to optimize voluntary licensing, to expand its reach, to make regional voluntary licensing work, that we still be aware that governments need to simultaneously carry a stick, and that stick is involuntary licenses, compulsory licenses, and government use licenses. We cannot, I think, feed in to the narrative with big pharma, and high-income countries are singing the same tune at this time, which is leave us to voluntary measures, it will be fine. And we've had lots of experience of voluntary measures having accomplished very important progress in a limited set of areas, but overall not really resulting in equitable access of new technologies. As well, there really has to be a greater emphasis on what are the acceptable terms of socially responsible licensing. We know at present that almost always upper middle income countries are left out. We know almost always Latin American countries are left out. And so to ignore the risk of voluntary licensing being accepted, and yet key areas and key countries being left out is unacceptable. And then finally, on Ella's point on regional production, we know that the voluntary mechanisms at this point leave out the key big upper middle income countries that are drivers of regional, regional success of regional manufacturing. If they are not included in voluntary licensing, the prospects for a viable regional market is that much less for regional producers. And so all of this is an urge that we continue to valorize the use of involuntary mechanisms as well as socially responsible licensing.
Thank you, Brooke. You got 1 minute and 22 seconds. I completely agree with my colleague Brooke. In the report, we mentioned the possibility of compulsory licensing and other mechanism as an important, stick, to incentivize if things go wrong. But in any case, compulsory licensing do not address ethical issues. For example, I mean, there are the principles of respecting indigenous communities' knowledge, that there is no unethical use of the technology. That are things that are not addressed by that type of involuntary measures. So yes, it's very important. We work on it. We support it, but voluntary licensing and social responsible licensing have a much bigger scope of application. So they are complementary. Peter, you have the floor. 1 minute.
Gracias, yes, sir. Gracias, Luis. Thanks for the excellent event. And of course, we here, Public Citizen, agree with much of what has been said today and agree with Brooke on compulsory measures, including just as an inducement to give strength to our voluntary efforts. But what I wanted to say actually was to reinforce the points about access planning, which we see as very important and a big opportunity. It's just important to note what Jamie says in the chat, that this is now a bipartisan policy in the United States. It didn't sneak through. The current White House endorsed access planning, as did the prior. And so we now have NIH with the support of two administrations moving forward on an expectation that if you use public inventions, if you're a manufacturer that uses public inventions, you're going to put them forward on accessible terms. And of course, we want to strengthen that. But we should notice what a big opening it is, with a couple dozen universities or so that have already followed suit, with the wind at our backs from the pressure countries are feeling from high drug prices and the experience of COVID inequity. There's a real opportunity now to create access planning as sort of a minimum floor, an expectation across all funders that's included when we put forward public inventions, and hopefully when we put forward public money, that they're always going to have at a minimum an access plan component, and we can work together to strengthen those conditions. If we can work, but there's, funders always feel there's a collective action problem, right? They feel like if we do it and someone else doesn't, then we're at a disadvantage trying to attract manufacturers, licensees. So we need convenings and papers and other mechanisms to establish access planning as sort of the minimum expectation for all funding and inventions. And, even though we always sort of are looking for something stronger, we're very committed to helping that happen. I'll try and slow down, Esteban, but one more point, Luis, if I may, just for the technology transfer officers or others on the phone. People like access planning, stakeholders, third parties besides us like access planning because it's seen as fair, creating a level playing field early in the funding stream. Everyone is on notice that if you use the public funds, you're going to ensure access in the following ways. And that helps it be sort of a minimum negotiated solution. And we shouldn't move away from our more aggressive pushes. Obviously, we're not going to, but this is something we ought to be able to achieve together after COVID. Thanks. Thanks for everyone's comments.
So, thank you, Peter. I will take two more questions. We are close to.
Friends for Latin America universities here with us, please feel free to comment or ask critical questions, suggestions. This is what forums are for. As Isabel said, we are in the summertime here. Carolina, Are you coughing or just getting ready? No, I'm calling your attention so you can see my hand. Carolina is the consultant on IP. 1 minute, please. Thank you, Luis. My question is regarding the mechanism of voluntary licensing that has been established in some European countries through vouchers as incentive for companies or creators that take this alternative. The Chilean reality and the scenario we have, maybe the mandatory mechanism is far away from being a reality. Voluntary licensing can have greater possibilities. I would like to know how this has worked in practice, this mechanism, and what control mechanisms can be established to avoid this being a perverse mechanism, so we can have access to vouchers with technology that can be not too relevant for one company, but takes us to a technology that does not have open licensing, and it's very expensive, for instance. Thank you. Thank you, Carolina. Last question before moving on the comments and questions for the panel members. No more? I invite Isabel, Ella, James, Julia. You have a 30-second reaction to what has been stated through the questions.
I'll give a 30-second reaction. We talk about incentives, but we really don't talk about who is going to pay for development and pay for the products at the end of the day. And I think we do need to note that, yes, they must be paid for. And in some cases, those products have, we'll say, a dual market. There's a commercial market. The subsidizing perhaps of less commercially relevant markets, or even where there's really no commercial market, happens in a different way. And so we need to think who is going to be paying for the development and the purchase of the end product of each one of these things when we talk about how that funding is going to be taking place and what kinds of licenses and agreements we need to get there. And I think when we talk about convenings, we need to be specific as to which of these issues are we trying to address, what's common way of dealing with all of them, and what has to be more detailed. So if you've got a traveler's market in one case and you have no market, except perhaps an organization like Gavi in another market, what does that mean for who's paying and what the incentive looks like? Thanks.
Any other reaction? I cannot believe that James has nothing to say.
Can I? I'll jump in if this is the right time, please.
Go. I mean, you have 1 minute. We are finishing now. Finally.
Right. Well, in terms of pooling or things that involve some sort of incentive system that may be implemented in any kind of a way, I think that it's important in terms of the standards that Brooke talked about. There has to be some criteria, some standards that you want. Like one standard I would have is there has to be a pathway for every country to somehow participate at some level in some access pooling mechanism involving government-funded research. It may be different requirements based on the circumstances and capabilities of the countries, but there should be some path at which it could be inclusive in terms of who could benefit in terms of the governments. That said, it doesn't necessarily have to require zero effort by anyone to participate. I think that kind of you have to be kind of realistic. You can't just say, everybody gets all the benefits even if they do nothing, because a lot of people will do nothing. So I think it's realistic to say in some cases you can have some mechanisms that require people to do something, to make some commitments to participate in the benefits of some social purpose licensing program.
Thank you, James. Ella, a final word? 30 seconds.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's a super interesting discussion, and I'm learning from all of you. And I just want to say I agree with Brooke and what Peter have underlined, that sometimes it's very necessary to look into the involuntary measures, because we also have seen a decline in willingness of pharmaceutical companies to cooperate on voluntary basis, unfortunately. And therefore I think it is important to keep this option open, although, like you mentioned, Luis, it takes a lot of effort, and the scope sometimes isn't as good. So we should also look into improving this, the policy around the use of flexibilities, so it will make it easier for countries that are in dire need. Thank you very much, and thanks for the great webinar.
I will give Isabel the final word, because she's going to do the closing. So before she closes me, I will make one final comment. I mean, we have to keep in mind that all these incentives and all these challenges are not to be seen isolated, and so the responses are complex, depending on the challenge and depending on the space. So it is. So we have to be able to design combined, solution for problems that are there. So it's not one. Just we have to work all together, and especially on the issue of funding, I think it's the most critical, because funding makes the world move, and I think there is a tremendous space to engage private entities like private banks, development banks. I was just last week in the CAF.
The Forum of Inter-American Bank in Latin America. We're talking about innovation, about the relevance of the sustained development, but there was not a session, a plenary meeting on how to fund for tech transfer, socially responsible one, that was treated in closed tables, but this is a matter that's not well understood, and it's not in the agenda. So we need to put this matter for big financing. So once again, thank you very much for all of those who supported us in this study. Your comments. I need to mention Luis Hilary Inadel, who also provided very important comments to improve. Thank you all. I give the floor to Isabel so she can give the final remarks. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you very much, Luis, to all the presenters here with us from the Network of Innovation of State Universities. It's a pleasure to approach the experiences you have shared with us. It represents a high interest and a communicational challenge beyond public policy and financing. There's a challenge on making these matters visible in the public sphere, know how to reach other spaces, how to use these discussion spaces for decision making that can be reached only with work and as in these calls. at a regional level, at a global level, is a challenge for Latin American institutions. Diversity also allows us to make progress according to our own cultural realities at Latin American level, but the challenge is to making this visible. These matters are not so nice to go through. Regulations, we can be across the board with social purposes, common good, ethical values that we have in state universities is in general and universities, and the impact that this kind of action have regarding society. Therefore, I think and I value very much this meeting, and this can be replicated over time and put these matters in the agenda as public spaces with greater strength, maybe in Europe and North America. This can be more advanced, but for the region in Latin America, it means a very important challenge. And we can take from the experience that you have been developing. Thank you very much. Luis has organized this with everybody taking part from their own professional spaces. Thank you all. And we hope that this can be done again and the links can be kept over time. Thank you very much, Luis, your team, for this work and this possibility of meeting all. Thank you very much, Isabel. Please turn on your cameras if you wish to be in the official photo of this event. Regards to Dan, the author. Adan, the author. Are we ready for the photo? Smile. Thank you. Bye. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Gracias. Bye.
Thank you. Gracias.